Welcome back. We finally stabilized our position in the nether last episode, and with my bottom firmly clad in only the finest, extremely heavy, slimy, cold gold foil that money can buy, and my stomach full of questionably sourced melon juice, I am now free to firmly cement the iron fist of my control, specifically over the contents of my inventory, which are varied, sundry, and extremely disorganized. This prompts such interesting inquiries as, why do I have 8 severed demon arms? For that matter, why do I have any severed demon arms? Do I need to be storing an unspecified quantity of demon arms for potential future utility? And how many severed demon arms do I need to store? Normal people might worry about their jobs or something, but these are the high priority questions that keep a goose up at night. Regardless, ain't nothing getting done without XP, and we are long past the point that torch crafting would work, even if they didn't somehow burn up in lava, so off I go on another dungeon crawl to suck the nether dry of its tasty, tasty brain juice. Alrighty, upgrade time. Gold armor may be absolute pants at everything else, but it is incredibly enchantable, to the point where getting mostly full protection 4 on everything is quite simple. There are a bunch of utility enchantments and whatnot that I'm missing, but by that same token, I'm also up to Strength and Vitality 3 on the chestplate and Underwater Strider 2 on the boots, and everything else lands somewhere on the spectrum of optional to unnecessary, so I don't much care about them. The other 4 books that I got of XP get dumped into trying to get health rolls on a couple of my baubles. Yes, these are largely temporary since the shield will be crafted with, and the cross is honestly not that great of a bauble and can be replaced with literally anything else, but, more health is more gooder. I also tried re-rolling for the Undying perk, which did nothing other than waste 13 odd nether stars and baited a really hardcore Ghost Rider fan into ramming me at full speed and trying to blow me up in the privacy of my own domicile. I was fine. The ghetto little auto smelter that I've been using to recycle armor was less than fine. And this is why all of my storage has ablative armor plating. It's to prevent stuff like this from happening to something I actually care about. The last thing I do before I leave is reimburse all the respawn glowstone that I created definitely 100% legitimately at the very beginning of the run, made a new ender chest, and emptied the old ender chest out and destroyed it. Back in the beginning, I was too lazy to use a nether portal each time I died, so I just spawned in a bunch of glowstone and an ender chest to use with the totem in the spawning area, but I have been self-funding my own glowstone for a while and am not dying all that much, so it's kind of outlived its purpose. That space would be far better served now by storing, say, 27 random pieces of diamond pet armor that I pilfered from a dungeon or something, as an example. So, how are things going? Really, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, as you can see, I'm, hanging in there. It's been kind of warm lately, but I found this awesome sauna that I think you should try out. And their massage is literally to die for. Anyway, I have this wedding I have to get off to, but it was nice catching up again, so see you at some indeterminate time in the future. Meanwhile, at the wedding, one of these days that wedding bit is going to stop being funny, and it is not going to be today. Anyway, my first stop on the great and very slow bon voyage is another nether city I found a few hundred blocks south of the old one. So much for them being rare. Their loot is not the greatest, but I am low on gold, they are quick to raid, and the libraries are the most concentrated collection of enchanted books I know of in the entire dimension, so I might as well hit on them a little bit. And after firmly establishing that the nether has no rules regarding screaming, running, murdering people, or engaging in spontaneous acts of mass arson in their reading establishments, I clear the place out and take a look. In short, there is pretty much squat all, and the single most valuable enchantment I found was a book with Strength and Vitality 1 on it. Congratulations, Nether City. You had one job, and failed. That said, a like night event that happens mid-loot dump does prove useful. This is the Dragon's Roar event. As the name suggests, it spawns dragons, or at least it spawns Lycanite dragons, which is a classification that generously encompasses a broad assortment of creatures traditionally not considered to be draconic, such as winged monitor lizards, quetzalcoatls, giant roosters, and highly problematic children's TV show characters. You might think that these creatures have precisely nothing to do with dragons, except for the fact that they can fly, sometimes, and in the case of Barney, breathe fire, and you would be entirely correct in that belief. Lycanite's taxonomical definitions are, if anything, even more jank than the mobs they refer to, and as far as I can tell when the mod says dragon, it mostly just means big thing with wings. Irrespective of their questionable naming schema, Lycanite dragons have a bunch of drops that I care about, so I spend the event farming as many of them as I can. Quetzalcoatls and Moroks, which are the giant lizards, drop prismarine and prismarine crystals, and the giant chickens drop feathers, all three of which are items that I would have struggled to get in any other way, and have a couple interesting future applications that I might want access to. They also drop emeralds, which, well, in retrospect, are not actually all that useful, but at the time I thought they might have been worth grabbing. The second library proves to be far more promising in that it gives me a single mending book for the trouble of evicting all of the recent problem causers. This is basically just going to be turned into a damage upgrade some theoretical point in the future. Without a full set with mending, silver armor is not that much better than gold, even if the passives it grants are nice, and mending conflicts with infinity, leaving me with the option of putting it on some kind of tool, no thanks, or a melee weapon. I can make Dragon Bone now, and I suspect that Dragon Bone nunchucks will be my go-to once I can get enough books to make a Reader's Digest enchantment payload, but right now we are sitting roughly at Cliff Notes level, so there's not much use for it there either. The third library, though, that one is interesting. Fiery Edge is another one of those core endgame enchantments I need, especially if I'm going with a nunchuck build, but the best pick is an enchantment called Bluntness. In short, this enchantment is sharpness, but in reverse. Now, Ghost, you ask, why could you possibly want to make things do less damage? Well, it's a secret, and I don't even know if it will work, but I have a couple of theories that I might end up needing to test this series that rely on a weapon that does 0 damage, and this helps with that. Despite the 3 location types I mentioned being the only major dungeons the Nether has to offer, they're far from the only location that has stuff worth looting. Case in point, vanilla nether forts, despite having a relative dearth of any of the shiny and rare, do occasionally have chests with stuff worth stealing in them. Case in point, the 2 cracked dragon scales that I just found. I'm unsure as to whether I can get the stuff I need to repair these, but they break down into spectral silt just fine, and that's something of a rare commodity in and of itself. There's also these ruined battle towers, which aren't super useful for their loot, but do give us access to a whole bunch of weird stuff. For one, their trash loot tables are unique and contain both seeds and eggs, which would normally be useless, but in this case allow me to grow wheat and farm chickens, if that's somehow useful. They also have a bunch of vanilla mob spawners in them, including cave spiders, a mob that we haven't sourced before, and zombies, a mob that is otherwise rather annoying to get. This one in particular also seems to be a tad bit too well endowed for its own good, though, and has torn its way all the way through the roof of the Nether, which is a tad bit unusual. It's certainly not unheard of, and goodness knows that there are any number of other ways this happens all the time, but having roof access is still kind of interesting. In fact, now that I think about it, I think it's time for a field trip. The roof of the Nether is boring, yes, but it's also not a lava-filled wasteland infested with monsters from the depths of hell, which lends itself to long-distance transport. This journey is periodically interrupted by me poking holes down through the random roof breakpoints to see if there's any dungeons to loot, and spoilers, there are not many. I've kind of schlorped up all of the local stuff by now. Still, I do find some new local dungeons in my area, such as this one, wherein I got myself a Bazor. Tasty, tasty. Not the highest priority of item, given that the Nether is not all that friendly for poison purposes, but as with so many other useless baubles, it is a crafting ingredient, so I might as well grab it. And also this one, where I got myself some sufficiently advanced mending for a theoretical bow in the future. The cart is being firmly put before the equestrian substitute here, seeing as I have not so much as sniffed a whiff of the other good bow enchantments this run, but that will come with time, hopefully. I have Spread Shot as well, which is utterly useless, but I do appreciate the game trying. Nether roof access also allows me to profit from what I can only conclude is some sort of dimensional identity crisis in the making when I discover this lovely little half-complete Lycanite dungeon that seems to have taken a very wrong turn in Albuquerque and ended up in the wrong dimension entirely. As far as I'm aware, these are not supposed to spawn in the Nether, but it's a lovely little gift horse, and it would be a shame to turn it down because of its poor oral hygiene, so let's see what it has to offer. Well, I can tell you right now, it does not have a staircase to offer. A staircase would have been good to have, actually. Fun fact, if you build a staircase like this in Minecraft, you are a sociopath, that is all. As it so happens, finding an end dimension dungeon in the Nether is rather more impactful than you would expect. But not for the reasons that you're thinking. There's already quite a bit of overlap in the mob types between the Nether and the End, give or take some additional demons, so there really is not much in the way of new mob drops to extract, and the loot tables for the chests are identical. What it does do, however, quite by accident, is teach me a few fun things about how mob spawning works. Case in point, I really should have built my base of operations high above the nether roof instead of at bedrock. Lycanite mobs all have custom spawning conditions programmed into them that determine where and how they can show up, and turns out that some of those spawning conditions are specifically tied to the Y altitude that you are occupying at any given time, and most of them don't work if you are, say, a couple hundred blocks above the bedrock. Or alternatively, and far more likely, there's just so many Lycanite mobs spawning here already that the game gave up and can't spawn anymore, which is kind of interesting for mob switch reasons, but we'll leave that here. More important than that, though, these dungeons spawn a pool of frosty electric blue raspberry monster snot called ooze, which interests me greatly, because this stuff is the ticket to a whole host of fun and games that I didn't think that I'd have a chance of playing with, and I cannot wait to crack this game wide open with it. But first, due diligence must reign supreme, so I clear out the rest of the dungeon, complete with its broad assortment of bosses that are so large that they physically cannot attack me because their gun is clipping into the roof, which if nothing else helps continue the lycanitic trend of having many interesting things with somewhat questionable programmatic implementation. Fun side note, you remember how earlier I was saying it would be almost impossible to get a Beast Soulstone from out? Strike that, it turns out that the rats in the dungeons drop them. Not sure how useful they will be, because the Beast Soulstone does nothing for the whole extremely flammable horse problem, but we can get them. So, while we're doing this, here's another fun take for you all. RLCraft is an exercise in double standards. And no, not like that, hear me out here. This is supposed to be a realistic life simulator, right? So why is it that these people can blast 4 different colors of arson all over their city and then try to eat me, and literally nobody cares, but when I try to do just a teensy little bit of extremely profitable resource management allocations, all of a sudden it's illegal and dangerous and a gross violation of the societal contract punishable by death? Like, hello? Pot, meet the Macy's cookware department. I don't even care about you people. Can I just read your books in peace, please? Also, here's another fun take that I wish I'd known 2 episodes ago. Netherworts are crops, which very, very rarely can spawn spriggans. Spriggans drop sticks, which means that mess with an axe and finding the planks was entirely unnecessary, and I could have just been a nice safe little farmer until I got around to making tools. Or I could also have just punched out all the mold patches on the netherrack, because those also count as plants for some reason. That's a little bit annoying. After further exploring the rest of the Lycanite dungeon, which was cut into by another city in classic RLCraft structure thrashing fashion, I also obtained buckets of acid, which, like the ooze, has some fun uses, especially in combination with ooze, that will result in some massive power scaling nonsense here in a moment. Plus, you just never know when a giant lake of acid could come in handy. After I get back home, with mystery fluids in tow, it's cleanup time once again, because even my considerable prowess at cramming things into small containers is running up against some hard limits here. During this, I decide to pop open all of my Beast Soulstones, since they are quite literally useless for anything else, and netted myself a couple of bats in the process. Now, Epions are not fireproof, but they do fly, and this means that I might stand a chance at having a mount that won't go the way of a chestnut and roast itself over the nearest open fire when I ride it, which is nice, conditional on the degree of impossibility associated with getting a saddle for it. So, let's talk fluid chemistry. Lycanites introduces 8 new fluid types to the game: poison, acid, ooze, their 3 companion fluids, Vespoison, Sharacid, and Rabbitooze, which function similarly except for the fact that mobs can't spawn in them and they can be replicated like water. For our purposes, they are identical, aside from that replication behavior, by the way, so I will just talk about them in their natural state. There's also Mog Lava, also known as Renewable Lava with some funny quirks, and Honey, which we can't get. On their own, these fluids are not terribly useful. What we care about is how they interact with each other and their environment. For starters, ooze, when dropped on flowing lava, makes obsidian. Yes, flowing lava. Obsidian was already renewable and not that rare besides, but now it's extra renewable with a little side of, but why though? Acid dropped on lava makes granite, which is fine, I guess, except for the fact that granite is right up there with netherrack on the list of ugly things that I wouldn't be caught dead building with. Lava dropped on either of those fluids makes stone, which means cobblestone farms are now a thing, and this unlocks building materials that don't make me want to claw my eyes out, but is otherwise unremarkable since we could get stone already. The real fun that we can have is ooze. Ooze, dropped on lava, makes diorite, which again is unremarkable since we could craft that, but ooze dropped on acid makes packed ice, and that is useful. Buried deep in the annals of otherwise flipping useless crafting options is a bunch of, let's call them environmental crafting options. On their own, that would be a neat addition to the game, and I think that stuff like environmental crafting would go a long way towards improving the depth of modern Minecraft's mechanics, hint hint, as opposed to, say, sloppily jamming a retextured mob of the week down our throats and expecting us to lap it up and call it transformative. Mojang. But I digress. In my Skyblock run, I touched very briefly on one such recipe, which lets you craft gravel from cobblestone by dropping an anvil on it. Another one of those recipes lets me make ice out of packed ice. This ice can then be silk-touched with a pickaxe and used again in another crafting recipe, this time with a cauldron over a fire. Alright class, think back to 3rd grade science. When we heat ice, what do we get? That's right, water. In a cauldron, which prevents it from instantly evaporating in the nether, because that's just how logic works. Somewhat annoyingly, there is also a recipe to make clean water in a lit cauldron, so what you actually get if you try to bottle the ice water in a lit cauldron is bottles of purified water, which simultaneously defeats the purpose of the whole exercise and raises some very interesting questions about what exactly constitutes purification, given that the stuff is canonically made out of chunks of melted raw acid that I chiseled out of a hole in the ground and smashed with a used anvil. Thankfully, the cauldron itself technically contains regular water, so it's just a bottling step that purifies it, and you can get around this conversion by bucketing the water, putting it in a new unlit cauldron, and bottling from there. This, finally, means that I can craft potions. Like, potions of fire resistance, which are probably useful. And also beverages, which are also probably useful. I can also craft alewort, which is notably less useful, but I had to try it at least once. Now, you probably think you know what comes next. You would be wrong if you guessed what comes next was me re-rolling a random unbreakable dungeon loot diamond pickaxe for maximum mining efficiency, slapping efficiency 6 on it with a quark tome, and using my dragon drops from earlier to craft 2 haste potion rings with even more mining speed on them, and then going out and extracting obsidian from the nether at extreme velocity. And you would be wrong about this, because I did that, but 2 minutes into the process, I realized that I can make obsidian faster, safer, and easier with a bit of mog lava and ooze at home without having to worry about any sort of mobs or, the commute. Shout out to Lycanitic crafting recipes here. Because of how buckets work, this recipe lets you turn a bucket of lava and a gas tier into a bucket of mog lava and a free bucket. Because that's just how buckets work, baby. I have seen the truth of this world, and it told me that buckets are inevitable. This was shortly preceded with a wedding train of stupid game interactions, long enough to justify the 5-digit price tag placed on full-feature marriage ceremonies, though. Seriously, folks, just elope, it's cheaper. Several rounds of iterative refinement on the whole obsidian from nothing process eventually resulted in me AFKing in front of what is basically an extremely cursed vanilla cobblestone farm retrofitted to handle lycanitic fluid jankery, resulting in functionally infinite free obsidian from a machine that I find deeply and personally triggering because of the uncanny valley effect. You know how AI-generated humans always look a little bit off, and even if you can't quite put your finger on why they're off, they are still very, very much not right? This obsidian factory does that to me. Machines that look like this should not be making obsidian. This is weird and I hate it. But it does work. So, I'll live. Alright, Goose, you say. I'll bite. Why do you need an absolutely insane amount of obsidian this time? Well, dear viewer, to make a boat. And also, ironically, it's one of a very small number of blocks that I can collect a large amount of automatically, which is kind of a strange position for obsidian to be in, but I will take it. Plus it's blast-proof, which is always nice to have in this place. The reasoning for this is very simple. Now that I can craft water bottles, I can craft fun things like potions. On its own, this is a game changer since I can now do things like be fireproof and stack buffs without having to rely on potion rings, but the part I care about for this project is the potion of ice resistance in the nether. You might have noticed, whilst looking around my base, that things have been going downhill lately. This is because of lycanites, as to be expected. As I expand and make more stuff, I need more space. More space means more mobs can spawn, and more mob spawning means more mobs blowing things up, lighting things on fire, flooding things with lava, and just being a phenomenal pain in my, by now, extremely perforated rear end. The solution to this is to take a page out of the Holy Book and drown them all with a biblical flood of, in this case, blue raspberry frozen yogurt. Now, admittedly, this lacks a lot of the gravitas that would be present if I were to, say, do it with water, but, well, nether. And also lycanite mobs can spawn in water, so that wouldn't help. They can't, however, spawn in rabbitous, and as long as I keep my potions of ice resistance topped up, the stuff lets me remain safe, cozy, and nice and chilly inside my giant obsidian freezer box. So I made a freezer box. Now we just have to work on the nice, safe, and cozy parts. First off, rabbitous is incredibly cold. So cold that even in the depths of the nether, it will freeze you to death if you swim in it for too long, so I, for the first time ever, had to install some space heaters to take the chill off. In the nether. While wearing cooling armor. Forget heating the great outdoors, I am now wearing a bikini made out of ice cubes in hell while swimming in liquid nitrogen heated by the concentrated magic of infernal demons, and that apparently somehow results in a nice neutral temperature. Who knew? So, now let's do something about the whole unable to move in this stuff whilst drowning in sludge bit. Now sure, I could just throw a potion at the problem and call it a day, or for that matter, install a bunch of beacons or something, since I am on the roof of the nether now and beacons are free, but I have a much better idea, which is spending multiple hours of my life fishing. Oh boy, do I love fishing. Now, ironically, while the game has not seen fit to equip me with most of the enchanted books I need for progression purposes, it has been happily supplying me with a near-endless conga line of fishing-related enchantments, so that part was easy at least. Now we just need the fish, which is a rather interesting problem, because despite my tracking device saying that there's fish here, evidence indicates otherwise. I even tried spawning in unenchanted fishing rods on the off chance that some combination of my advanced lure 1 and random armor buffs was bugging the thing out, but nothing I did here seemed to help. There's just nothing biting. Several more minutes of me testing in the overworld also seemed to corroborate this. For whatever reason, fishing is impossible in this world. They are not biting. It does not matter what rod I use, where I fish, what the fish detectors say, what armor, equipment, baubles, or buffs I have. I just cannot catch fish in this world, and only this world. So you know what? It's fine. Joke's on you. I didn't feel like moving around in my home anyway. Breathing is likewise going to be a little bit of a problem for a bit, but that's what slabs are for. Now I just need to move all of my stuff over here before it gets spontaneously exploded, and not in the happy fun time way. So I do that. Very slowly. Now, living in a puddle of Baja Blast is all very well and good, and works fine for basic things like storing items, crafting equipment, and somehow, despite the apparent lack of oxygen, smelting stuff. But for more exotic operations, it runs into a few bottlenecks. Case in point, an atmosphere entirely composed of neon blue beverages of questionable comestibility tends to mess with enchanting tables a bit, since last I checked, bookcases and soda don't mix very well unless you put them both in a wood chipper. The solution to this is not exactly an airlock, but maybe a moon pool would be a better description. It's a bubble of air, just large enough to host an enchanting table and a couple of anvils. Ooze is toxic to almost every mob that can spawn in the nether, so this should keep most of the nasties out of my house proper, while still letting me hop out and slap brain juice on things as needed. This moon pool is nice and dandy for basic living situations, but they're also going to be next to useless for the other main air-requiring operations I conduct, which is farming. Melon vines, you see, are not a fan of swimming in iced clown juice, and choose to manifest this displeasure by spontaneously dying, which tends to result in rather few melons that I would otherwise prefer. Since harvesting them myself would require, among other things, a way for mobs to ruin my life, the solution here is simple. Make a machine do it. Mobs, generally speaking, only have it out for me in particular, and happily will ignore almost everything else around them almost all of the time. Animals do tend to attract them, and summarily get eaten, so chicken farming is probably going to be a tad tricky if I ever decide to do that, but something like an automatic melon farm, well, as long as there isn't anything in it that can get turned into lava, and it has some blast-proof plating on the outside to prevent explosions, melon farms are pretty bomb-proof. Unlike my cobblestone fabricator, which is decidedly less so. Thank you, Race, for giving me a plausible reason to say that the Phantom was not the worst mob to ever grace Minecraft's codebase. And with a wee little bit of automation, one extremely terrible bog-standard automatic melon farm. Normally, I would try to find an original source for designs that I use so I can credit people, but there are quite literally so many versions of this melon farm out there that do basically the exact same thing, and I've been using this design for so long that I would be far more likely to commit the cardinal sin of cytogenesis than I would provide an actually usable reference here. Your 10-second explanation is that an intermittent redstone pulse will trigger the pistons, and a hopper minecart picks the slices up. Easy peasy, melon squeezy, conditional on the nether letting these things do anything other than bake in their farming plot and pollute my world with the eternal sounds of minecart rolling. In a newer version of this game, you can make this farm work slightly better and eliminate piston thrashing by using observers to detect melon vine state changes, But that is not a thing in this version, so I just whacked down a detector rail and used that as a timer instead. I really don't need this farm to be good, so speed and efficiency are largely irrelevant as long as it's automatic. Give or take the whole living in an icebox in the Nether situation, I now have a fairly stable place to build and branch out from, complete with live-in melon delivery services, leaving me with naught to do but start brutally rendering down dungeons into their tasty experience points, and also their raw resources. Living in the Nether has kind of flipped the value proposition for most of my common loot items on its head. Stuff like glowstone and blaze powder, which is traditionally a little bit annoying to get in bulk, is basically worthless now, and instead I am frantically trying to collect such valuable and rare resources as empty glass bottles, lapis lazuli, and stale bread from dungeon chests. And, baubles, obviously. And also wither skulls, not because I care about the nether stars, but specifically because I need wither skulls for a little project I have in mind. At the very least, the libraries of this dungeon are still paying out. One mending book down, and another, let's be realistic here and say 5 to go? I only really need them for silver armor and melee weapons because everything else is either unbreakable, needs special advanced mending, or can be made out of gold. Depending on what your definition of luck is, I also got a Stone of Inertia Null from a lucky Infernal Mob drop. This is kind of an interesting bauble in so much as you only get it from Infernal Mob drops, but it's also pretty much useless for this run. Between feather falling, athletics passes, and my ginormous health pool, fall damage isn't and never has been an issue, and I already get knockback resistance passively from other baubles, and kinetic damage resistance only helps for elytra collisions and instability or massive swim speed boosts smacking you into walls. None of these are likely to happen in the Nether, so into the junk bin it goes. Maybe if this were an end-only run, I could see it being good. On the other hand, the Stone of the Sea that drops relatively soon after is immensely interesting to me, so much so that I was willing to spend several hours fishing in the Nether not 10 minutes ago to get one. But I guess like all things in RLCraft, this too is a problem that can be solved by beating the snot out of random helpless-ish creatures and stealing their lunch money. The Stone of the Sea, aka Discount Poseidon, is a rather confusing amulet whose name should probably be Stone of the Everything Relatively Liquidish, since its primary gimmick is increased movement speed in a whole host of fluids utterly unrelated to the concept of water, including, but not limited to, lava, ooze, acid, honey, toxic waste, grape juice, and hard liquor, and it also grants infinite breathing abilities for all of them. The latter is, for reasons beyond my comprehension, largely irrelevant in the Nether, because you can breathe lava just fine, but if your house happens to be made out of solid Baja Blast, this becomes quite handy quite quickly. It also is hands down the most useful amulet slot compatible bauble in the entire game, since the cross does basically nothing, and the Sin Pendant is an Amalgalich drop that only marginally improves your damage, a number that, if you can kill the Amalgalich to get it in the first place, is probably high enough already. The last great find of the dungeon is a lucky, but not lucky enough, drop of Supreme Sharpness 3 from a random trash slime. Now yes, this is substantially better than my current enchantment loadout, and more than justifies finally making myself some nunchucks, but it will also drive me absolutely batty and trigger my CDO every time I see the unmaximized enchantment on my items. Such is the great sacrifice I make for my YouTube community. Tell you what though, we are really due for that upgrade. And I won't quite say that I would sell my soul for some AoE, because knowing the nature of the local population here, someone might hear that and take me up on it. But on the other hand, I have never simped this hard for Arc Slash before in my life, and one of those two things has got to give. And as a final note for this episode, pro-life tip, do not let zombie pigmen speedball. Ever. They will go way too hard, though it does give them excellent loot, so on second thought, do let them speedball, but only in confined areas, please and thank you. With that nugget of wisdom delivered, we are out of time for today, so thank you as always for lending me yours, and I hope you enjoyed.